Hey, I'm Mike, and welcome to Retro Boost. Recently did a video comparing the N64 Virtual Console Experience between three different consoles, the Wii, the Wii U, and the Switch 2, using the Nintendo Online Expansion Pass to run the game, Star Fox 64. Had a lot of fun making that. Wanted to revisit this topic, but with a different console and game. This time, the Game Boy Advance, bringing back the Wii U and the Nintendo Online Expansion Pass with the Switch 2, but the Wii can't come to this party, so for a third option, decided to utilize my Retron-5, which can play a lot of things, but Game Boy Advance is one of them. So we'll see how all three of these mediums compare with their Game Boy Advance emulation. What's interesting is that all three of them support a pixel perfect kind of mode, that in addition to their full screen outputs, and two of them support scan lines. So we'll see how all of these alternate normal and alternate modes plus the scan lines compare between them where applicable, because not all of them can do scan lines. Two of the three of them can, though. So let's get into it by talking a bit about each hardware device and go over the basics about their features before we get into the main comparison content. Let's start with the basics on the Retron-5. Very interesting game console, supports a variety of cartridge ports: NES, Super Nintendo, Famicom, Super Famicom, Genesis, Game Boy, and Game Boy Advance. Cartridges are all supported. When you insert the cartridge, it performs a kind of ROM dump on it and then runs the game as an emulation on the RAM of the console. It does not create a permanent download. You're not copying the game permanently when you do this. It's sort of like how a lot of modern discs currently are. They're just keys that run the game, essentially. You can modify the firmware of the Retron-5, though, to support game downloads. I have not done that with mine, though. As far as running the games themselves, each game supports the option of importing or exporting its save data. You can create screenshots, you can do save states, all unique to the cartridge in question. So it's like having multiple game profiles, and all this information is stored on the SD card of the console itself. It outputs HDMI 720p, so the games look quite crisp and clean coming out of it. And other miscellaneous features: it does support controller button mapping and custom profiles per console. Plus, for controllers, it has actual ports for NES, Super Nintendo, and Genesis. You can use those original controllers, or you can use something like 8BitDo's retro receivers and use like an 8BitDo controller. That's what I do with it mostly now. So pretty cool device. I like it a lot. It's how I used to mostly play Super Nintendo and NES before I had RetroTINK devices way back in the past, and it makes for a convenient way for me to be able to play Game Boy Advance games specifically. It does support regular, like, full screen output, like 4:3 720p, but you can, for Game Boy Advance, force the original resolution and get something more like the original 3:2 that the Game Boy Advance would output by default. I would assume that what we're seeing is a 3:2 240x160 image in this 720p frame, but I'm not completely positive on that, so don't quote me. It's just my best guess. And then also scan lines. You can toggle scan lines on or off. They're pretty basic, like what would be the equivalent of like an exponential scan line setting for, like, say, the RetroTINK 5X. So pretty simple, and there aren't alternate masks to choose from, just this one option, which makes it really similar to like the 2X Pro now that I think about it. Just toggle it on or off. Cool that it's there, though. Then we got the Wii U, returning from last time, bringing its signature dark filter with it, unfortunately. But how will that play into this? Well, I guess we'll find out when we compare them. The Wii U, very much like the last video talking about it, you do have the ability to remap buttons, and now we have the ability to for the pixel perfect mode, which, like the Retron-5, formats that more 3:2 looking image within the frame and outputs it from there for a more like standard, more signaturely Game Boy Advance looking output. Very cool. It is worth noting, if you wanted to fill the screen, you can. Some online research I did found some articles that talked about flipping the console into 480p, and then the pixel perfect mode would fill the frame. The downside being that it's a 480p output, so it's not going to look as clear as a 1080p output on a flat screen. But if you were running this into a CRT, that might be the best looking option for you. I don't have a CRT, so this option doesn't really appeal to me much, but it's worth mentioning. And then finally, the Nintendo Switch/Switch 2 with their online expansion pass. Much like with the other ones, we have standard output, or we have the pixel perfect mode. Enabling that, like the others, no doubt gives us a very... Oh, where did it go? Oh, wait, hold on. Oh, yeah, there it is. All right. So that one's the most Game Boy Advanced sized pixel perfect output that I've seen so far. So it's got that going for it. Very authentic. I assume what I'm seeing here is the 240 by 160 sitting in a 4K frame, which is why it's so small. Points for authenticity. And then scanlines are an option, although it's a little more specific. We actually get like an LCD like mask, so it makes the whole image look like an old school, like a Game Boy Advance screen. Basically, it's like an old school LCD panel. That's pretty cool, actually. I like that quite a bit, because it really makes it feel like you're playing something that's not of this era. And it's formatted really well. Like I like how it looks. It's very defined. It's a very cool feature. So that's awesome. So there are the three of our systems all summarized in BASIC. Let's do some comparisons. Like last time, we'll do comparisons that just throws them all into one frame, standard output, and then the same comparison again, but the screen's adjusted somewhat to highlight the same areas on each one, so you can appreciate the differences in their respective situations versus the full frame thing. And then after that, we'll come back. What are we thinking? Well, when they're all side by side, funny thing about the Wii U and that dark filter it has, I think it has the most natural color when they're all side by side, at least. When they were by themselves, I really thought that the Retron-5 was like the most appealing one to me, although when you have them all side by side, the Retron-5 seems a little bit oversaturated, too bright, and the Wii U seems to be the most natural, though still too dark, and then the Switch version seems kind of flat color-wise, but very crisp and clear from a resolution standpoint. So they've all got kind of pros and cons. Interesting how that all plays out. And from a clarity standpoint, despite being 720p, the Retron-5 is putting up a good fight with its competition. All of them look great from a clarity standpoint, really. I think the Switch 2 is the one that really takes the cake in that category, but that makes sense because it'd be 4K output compared to 1080p and 720 for the other two. Now let's see them again, but using Pixel Perfect and Scanlines. Pixel Perfect between all three of them, and then a Scanline example using just the Retron and the Switch 2, since the Wii U doesn't have that ability. Although technically I could give it that ability since I do run it through my RetroTINK 4K Pro. For these examples, like the first video though, the resolutions are set to match so that the RetroTINK isn't doing any undue influence on the signal, but I guess that's a really roundabout way of giving Scanlines to the Wii U, but for this purpose, that wouldn't be authentic because it needs to be a feature of the software, the whole point of this whole exercise here. So anyway, here we go. Next round of comparisons, Pixel Perfect and Scanlines. All right. Well, what's your favorite? I'm not gonna tell you mine. All right, I'll tell you mine. I think the Switch 2 one's the best. Funny enough, I didn't think that I would have that going into this. I thought that I would grab onto the Retron-5. I've been so used to that system for Game Boy for like 6 years now, and I was a little surprised to see it not really do as well, in my opinion, compared to these other two. I still take away with the Wii U having the most like natural looking color, at least to me, but the Switch 2 kind of has it all. Although the color seems a little bit flat when it's side by side with these other two systems, by itself it looks fine and is very clear, and I really like that kind of LCD filter that you can add to it. It looks really cool. I was like really taken off guard by how much I do genuinely like that filter for Game Boy Advance for this situation here. And it's obviously the most accessible option for Game Boy Advance currently. Having a Switch or a Switch 2 and having their service, you can play them anywhere. Whereas I don't have a Game Boy Advance, so I can't play it anywhere unless I'm doing that. If I'm at home, no problem. Retron-5, now the Switch 2. So I was a little surprised there. I'd be curious to know what's your favorite, or if you use something else. Obviously there are other options. I don't have an actual Game Boy Advance. I never had that growing up. My first Nintendo portable console was a DS, and I acquired that pretty late in its lifespan. Never had a Game Boy, never had a Game Boy Advance. And then Retron-5 is my main thing. I don't have a GameCube Game Boy Advance player. That would be pretty cool to have one day, but I don't have that either. So these are my three main options for doing this comparison video. But I hope that you found this fun and cool to see them all side by side, see the different options as they work out. They are pretty cool. It was definitely cool to discover that filter for the Switch version. Was not expecting that. I thought it'd be the same as the N64, just turning on scan lines. But they went a little above and beyond for that one, so that's pretty sick. It's emulating like the actual screen of the Game Boy Advance, basically. That was really cool. So I will catch you on the next one. Thank you so much for watching.